my name is Joe Johnson. I'm the pastor at First United Methodist in Elmhurst. I'd like to welcome all of you here to Elmhurst Presbyterian. I love that the Methodists are in the Calvin group. Did everyone get the agenda? Yes? All right. Great. So this is an introductory conversation, and Reverend Fu is going to begin us in this conversation. I will continue, and then we'll move on to the district superintendent, and then we'll move on to some Q&A after that. My hope is we're here no longer than an hour to an hour and a half. I know some of us have already had long mornings, myself included. Not long, but you know. It's Sunday, yeah. So it's good that we're so excited that you're all here, and thank you so much for taking the time to have this important conversation. So, Reverend Fu?
Reverend, if I may, we have a sign-in.
Oh yeah, there's a sign-in going around. Please just sign your name and what church you're with, just so we have a record of who's here. Thank you.
Yes, I want to welcome you along with Reverend Joe and Reverend Bross. It is very heartening, I think. We were afraid that there would be nobody showing. So, we are thankful, and we're thankful for the interest. You know, church is important. The presence of the church in this area is important. It's been for years and years and years, and we stand on the shoulders of the saints that came before us. And so it is, at least it warms my heart to have all of you here. So I wanted to start off this morning by talking about why are we here. And I think that we all recognize, if we haven't had conversations with our congregations, or we haven't had conversations with our pastors, we all recognize, right, that our churches are facing some challenges, right? Certainly my two congregations know we're having a smaller and smaller congregation, a little bit less money, all those things. And so our future is in front of us for my congregation. But I've also heard echoes of that from Reverend Joe as well. You know, and so we are in this sort of post-Christendom time. There are more headwinds than tailwinds for us. This isn't the 1950s or 1960s. Okay, so we've had those rough conversations. We've had those conversations, and we kind of feel out. But we're coming off of COVID now, right? This is probably the first year that we've really been together post-COVID. We've seen what happens. And it just seems like this is an opportune time for us to get together and talk about what we really want to do, what we really want to be intentional about the future of our churches, about our ministries, about how we reach into our community, about how we develop disciples. This seems like an opportunity to have those conversations, especially coming out of COVID. And now we know sort of the challenges that are going to be in front of us for the next, whatever, 5, 10, 15, however long you're going to be old, that's it. So, that's kind of where I'm coming from, at least I wanted to talk about. I did want to just start off with two quotes to kind of set the mood. And I'll tell you where the sources of these quotes come from after I get going. The first quote is, maybe you identify with, "You may have an inner itch, a smoldering, deep in your soul passion. You have a Holy Spirit-given conviction that the church, the ordinary local church, has an extraordinary mission under the influence of the Holy Spirit to be part of Jesus' mission, sharing and living the gospel, seeking the healing of the world in Jesus' name, and not settling for anything else." The second quote I want to share with you is another person. "I totally subscribe to the mystery and faith required to embrace Romans 8:28. All things work together for good for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. I believe that God has opened a door for us, an open door that will reveal what God has in mind for the next expression of the United Methodist Church. It will look different and feel different and require new disciplines, open spirits, willing hearts, and curious minds. I believe that God is opening a door for us. The question is, will we have the courage to walk through that open door?" First quote is from Reverend Scott Field. who you might recognize as a big proponent of the WCA, of the conservative side of the Global Methodist Church. And yet, I resonate with his words, that we are a Holy Spirit-driven church. And the second set of quotes was from the president of the College of Bishops, searching for what our next steps are in the United Methodist Church. And so this, I think, is out there. I think this is out there in a wonderful way, a wonderful opportunity that we have to embrace. But we have to start thinking differently. So probably 20 or 30 years of evidence is now showing that we probably cannot continue to do church in exactly the same way we're doing it, because we're going to get the same results that we've gotten before. We don't have as many young people in our church. We don't engage in our community as much anymore. Right? We tend to be inwardly focused. Right? And we all know, right? We've all heard your pastors and your Sunday school that the real mission of the church, right, is to make disciples and to reach out into our community. And I think that a lot of us want to capture that. A lot of us want that vibrant, that life-giving church. That church that is part of a community that speaks into justice issues, speaks into helping people, and speaks into developing people and giving them hope. And so I think that's really why we're here. One of the things that Reverend Joe and I have been reading through is a book on vital mergers. Okay? And so before nothing has been decided, we haven't decided or talked about mergers or anything like that. But the book is a description of what's called a vital merger process. And this process talks about getting one or more churches together and really turning the church around in terms of refocusing on God, refocusing on the mission, going back to prayer, going back to discernment, finding out what God has in mind for us, as opposed to us struggling to find human answers to what we perceive to be human problems. Right? So it used to be in church that we could treat this like a technical problem. And a technical problem is something that lends itself to previous expertise, previous experience. So 30 years ago, if we had a reduction in our worship attendance, we'd open up our playbook. We'd say, we need an Easter egg hunt. And we'd run an Easter egg hunt. And people would come back. Right? Or we'd say, you know what, we need a potluck. Go in the playbook, potluck. And we'd be back and get a potluck. Okay? And that's a technical problem. It lends itself to expertise. It lends itself to best practices. But I think what we find ourselves today in is a church that are more what are called adaptive opportunities. And adaptive opportunities are the kind of things where previous expertise doesn't matter. Okay? What matters is this open spirit, this idea of exploration, this idea of experimenting, this idea of reaching out, finding what works and what doesn't work, and being nimble, being able to adjust quickly. And those are the kinds of things that I think that we find ourselves, especially those of us who have gone to church for years and years and years and years, find ourselves. We wonder why the things that we used to know that work don't work anymore. And we have to have that sort of exploratory, open experience and mindset to be able to do that. So this Vital Mergers project starts with God. It starts with prayer. It starts with discernment. It gets people together, having those conversations, talking about God. It recognizes that there's a lot that goes into a church merger. Okay? But fundamentally, it has to be a refocusing on who we are, on our mission, on our purpose, on our vision, and on programs that will support that vision and that mission. These all have to be tied together. We don't have the luxury, right, of having 500 people and unlimited resources where we can do a lot of things that have to do with the mission and a lot of things that don't have to do with the mission. We have to be careful with our resources now. So, that process of discerning what God has in store for us, how we can re-engage our community, how we can continue to build disciples, starts with God. it starts with groups. It starts with groups of vision, like visioning teams, program teams after visioning. Also, there's an administrative side to this, right? What are the nuts and bolts that go into a merger? How do you really combine finances without offending everybody? How do you really deal with the building issues, right? And the building issues are one of the drivers here, right? Our buildings are probably a lot like First buildings, okay? They're good buildings, they're good solid, they'll survive a nuclear attack. But they're getting increasingly more expensive to keep. They're getting increasingly more expensive to keep, and as we're getting older, there are increasingly less people to take care of it, and increasingly less money to do so. And at some point, the question of stewardship does come to mind here. The question is, we've been blessed with a certain amount of money, a certain amount of property to do God's mission, to make the kingdom of God recognizable where we are. Is it a good idea for us to drop $200,000 on refurbishing this building when this building may or may not be suited for the kind of new ministry that our community is looking for? Is that good stewardship? And I would also leave you with, we all stand on the shoulder of saints, of the people that came before us. People who came and worked and gave money and sacrificed so that there would be a United Methodist presence in Elmhurst and in Villa Park. So that generations would have that, would be able to hear the good news, to hear our message of grace. Right? It is the legacy that all of us inherited as being current members of these churches. And so I don't take that responsibility lightly. That if there is a way for us to come up with a new expression of Methodism, a new way to do church in our areas, and I have no idea, trust me, I don't think the three of us have any idea what that would exactly look like. And that's sort of why we're here, to kind of kick that off and start thinking about the ways we could start dreaming about that and wondering about that and coming together. Right? But I take that responsibility seriously. You know, ours is a message of love, of grace, of justice. It can be somewhat unique in the Christian environment, especially nowadays. And I think that our area needs it. I think that Elmhurst and Villa Park need it. How we do that is a different question. But the question of, are we willing? Are we open to this? Are we open to coming together and engaging in this effort? That's really the question this morning that we're trying. This afternoon, yeah, because I'm preaching. Right. That's really the question in front of us: is do we have willing hearts and open minds to do some stuff that might be uncomfortable for us? You know, that might be new for us, that we might be tripping and falling, but the question is, are we open to tripping and falling together as we try and explore this? Okay? But that's the process of trying to refocus on God, make an effort to discern what God's looking for us, for our future, right? And the process of doing that. So that's the stage, okay? I'm going to turn it over, unless somebody has any questions yet, but I think we'll probably just hold off on the questions, I guess. We're going to have a question and answer at the end. So let's put that at the end, okay? So maybe we'll answer them, maybe we won't, but we can ask them and we can go from there, okay?
So I'm going to ask you to imagine about 120 years ago, and you're in Elmhurst, and a group of people got together because a lot fewer than this, because they wanted there to be a Methodist presence. And they had some success for a while, but guess what? They failed. And so there was about a decade where there were no Methodists in Elmhurst. And then in 1924, 7 people got together and started First United Methodist. I think it's a great thing. And then that church grew and changed and had different ideas and worked to meet the needs of the community. And I think that's what we are today. We have this great legacy of people wanting to reach the community on behalf of Jesus Christ and just doing whatever it takes to do that. I think we have this wonderful opportunity. And so I want to talk with you just very briefly about a demographic overview of 60126. So the top concern of the people living in our zip code, does anyone want to take a guess? Top concern? Not taxes. None of it's money. I'll just say that. None of it's money.
Education.
Not education. No. Not traffic. I'll let you go. Here it is. COVID-19. That is the number one concern of everyone in the Elmhurst zip code. Still.
How recently? Yeah, how have we been in the debt?
2021.
Oh, 2021.
And of course, that's a little dated, but that's still there. The number two concern, anyone want to guess?
Housing.
Not housing. I wish it were that. The John Wesley side of me says that's where we, no, it's not. Social and political tensions. Social and political tensions. That's number two. And number three is health crisis or illness. So those are the top three things that the people in our zip code are concerned about. Now, Reverend Fu talked about this in terms of what ministry might we do. And again, I'm not prescribing anything here. I'm just lifting up with the same demographic data. Does anyone want to guess what the top ministry program in our area would be? If we were only going to do one thing as a church, what is it that we should do based upon the demographics of our society here?
Feed the poor.
Fair housing.
For healthcare.
The neighborhoods.
You all are thinking like good Methodists. I love this. But there's a second part to Wesley's general rule of do good. So the first part of it is to do good to people's bodies, and you're talking about that. But what's the second part? Do good to their souls. So the first ministry program is warm and friendly encounters. So people are looking for positive relationships here in Elmhurst. Who can I have a relationship? Who can I have coffee with? Who can I call up? Who can I share what's happening in my life? Now, all of us have that, right? All of us have that in our local churches, right? Grab a cup of coffee. I mean, some of my people went out for lunch after church and had a great time. But that's the number one ministry concern. Warm, friendly encounters. What do you think the second one is? I'll help you. They're all spiritual. They're all spiritual.
Bible studies.
No, people not interested in that. Not interested in that. People aren't. The demographic. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. It's just that our audience, they're not interested in that. No. No. It's a what?
Is it sense of community?
No, they want a good quality sermon. That's the second. They want a good quality sermon. Do you see what I mean? They're all spiritual. And what's our business? Spirituality. Everything that is here. Anyone take a guess what the third one is? It's spiritual.
A good music program.
You're very close, Jack. Traditional worship. Traditional worship. So the top three ministry concerns of our demographic are warm, friendly encounters, quality sermons, and traditional worship. You still have a job, Dick. Dick's a organist. So as we think about ourselves and how we might reach out to our community, that gives us some targets. And someone brought up, and what do we all want to measure our ministry on? How many kids we have, right? That is the number 10 ministry program that people want. Family-oriented activities. Number 10. And we don't get to religious education for children until number 13. I'm not saying we shouldn't be about doing that. We should be about doing that, providing quality programming, and we're seeing that pour out in our data at our church. Families will be involved in a few things, but not every Sunday. Yesterday, an incredible pastor with Lady Revs, Randall. He ran the youth group up at Trinity Wilmette for, I don't know, 20 or 30 years, had 125 kids. But in his memoir, what did Reverend Randall write? At the time he was doing his ministry, the expectation was that kids in high school would go to Sunday school. Is that the expectation today? No, it's not the cultural expectation. It doesn't mean that we don't provide ministry. We do. But we just have to do it differently. I mean, we have 2 stories of graded classrooms at my church. Is that space we actually need for ministry? I don't think it is. Now, I don't want to tear the building down tomorrow, but I think based upon what our community is telling us they want and how we can reach out to them, we have some thinking to do about that. So, what's the number 1?
Warm
Warm and 2? And 3?
Traditional worship.
Does that sound like something we can do? Yeah, it does, right? They're all spiritual. And that's what we're in the business of doing, is developing people spiritually. That is our business. That is what we do. And then just a couple of things before I pass it over to our district superintendent. You know, we've had some success with community engagement at First Church. It takes a long time. But, you know, we have a clothing center, but attached to that clothing center is the youth breakfast ministry that happens on Saturdays. And then in addition to that, we also started the community arts program. And I just want to tell you a couple of things. So what happens is the children of the clients who come to the community arts program, come to the clothing center, can basically have free musical education. And we have a few kids who have taken us up on it. And one of the things that's beginning to happen is a lot of the people who come to our clothing center are refugees. I think predominantly from Guatemala. Is that right, Susan?
Yes.
Yeah, predominantly from Guatemala, but not everybody.
South America, and then switching over to
Afghanis, yeah, too. But what's been happening is these relationships have developed. The youth of the clothing center clients are developing relationships with our youth. And I think that's powerful. Not only that, but the people who are coming to the youth breakfast meeting are beginning to imagine themselves as part of the community. You know, one woman, as Lisa described it, brought in a whole big bag of plastic silverware because she feels part of the ministry. And I think that that's so important. And then one of our 4-year-old little girls who's taking piano lessons, she and her mother come together to really connect with the piano teacher and begin having life-changing conversations based upon it. So it can happen. It just takes time, and you just need space in which to do that. I just say all of this as sort of helping us to imagine. And there's far more than 7 people in this room. Methodism at Elmhurst, remember, began with 7 people. And we have that many times 7 or 8. And I think we could do some great ministry here as we look to the future. Reverend Ross.
What?
All right, so I want to give a feel for it. I know we have 2 United Methodist churches present, so I want to get a feel for who's here. So who here is a United Methodist? Oh, we're all connected. Good. All right. We are one. The world is my parish. What's that? Oh, Calvary's here too. So 3. Okay, I thought, great. I'm glad. All 3. All United Methodists?
Yes, sir.
So that we are connected. I just want to, based on what you all said, I want to say just a couple of quick things. And then we'll share a little bit of what's going on, a process of what emerge might look like. It sounds like, you're not in that full process yet, deciding what you want to do, but you need to know some of the facts. And so I'll share a little bit about merging, and then I'll be open or available for questions, okay? So based on some of the things you said is, when you're looking at those top three issues, COVID, health, political tension, one of the things I've been saying in the sense of disaffiliation, I'm glad we're going through disaffiliation. I'm not really, because I'm guessing I have to deal with it, but I'm glad that we're finally going to get to be who we want to be, and those who leave can be who they want to be. Because that will set us up to exceed. We will no longer be held down by tension. We will be free. And that freedom in the United Methodist Church is loving connection. That's what we've always been. What do all those three need? Loving connection. I think we're going to see the next wave. Every 500 years, we see a wave in religion. And we're about that point. I think United Methodism is in for a surge, to be honest. And I don't just say that because I'm United Methodist, but a couple of things. This is true now. The average person is driving close to 25 to 30 minutes for church. All across all churches, they'll drive 30 minutes. That's not a barrier any longer. So as much as you looked at your current zip code, there could be people from outside your zip code. People don't go to their neighborhood churches anymore. They do not walk unless they were long-term Lutherans, United Methodists for 60 years, and that's just the way they are. But those people are few and far between. People will leave their communities to find a church that matters. That's a really important thing, because you have to look out beyond the demographics of just your zip code and really find out what's the 30-mile radius. What are the zip codes that are represented there? So you might be able to probably do some more digging. Also, people are no longer denominational. If you look at typical churches anymore, the churches that are thriving and growing, non-denominational, they got everybody, all different types. United Methodist churches are no longer solely 90% United Methodists. Unless you're a small church that hasn't grown for many, many years. But churches that have grown or seen growth in the last 15, 20 years are mixed to the point where the minority of most folks were United Methodists to begin with. Okay? So that's got to also touch on what you're thinking about. Okay, so what's happening in churches? Since I'm in BS, the thing that we're learning is the most successful opportunities for churches to get better, to be more healthy, if they're at that point where they have to make some tough decisions, is merging. It's vastly sweeping the nationwide. There's a number of reasons. One, when you close a church because they can no longer afford the building or their pastor, once you go from full-time to part-time, it's kind of a steady downward cycle. That's just the numbers. Part-time churches do not go back to full-time very easily, if at all. Okay? And so once it gets to that point, which a lot of churches are, they say, well, if we just go to half-time, we can afford our pastor, we'll be okay. No, you actually stop growth pretty quickly. So as that's happening with churches, then the choice of that church at some point will be, do we just close? And what happens when you close? Every part of the DNA of the church, the ministries, the missions, stop. And then what happens? Those people leave, and most don't go to United Methodist Church. Because either there's not one in the area, or they're vastly different. We have United Methodist churches that are across the corner from one another, who are struggling financially. They will not join, because one was EUB and one was Methodist. It's true. Because we want our building, we want our place, our theology. And then so they leave, and so it closes. And what I often do, if I go to the church and they're closing, I say, do you have an opportunity to merge? And they say, oh, we don't want to do that. Let's close up. I want to be buried in this church. Well, okay, you probably will be. And you'll be the last one, because then after you go, we'll have to shut the door. But you see all these pictures of all the churches, and they don't want to change. They don't want to give up their building. They don't want to give up their stuff. There's like 5 variations of what the church was. And I said, what if the first group of people in your church, in that one-room church, said, no, we won't give up our building? You wouldn't be there. Change has always been a part of who we are. But yet, in a merge, you can keep identity and keep it going. You can keep so much alive in the midst. A good merger doesn't envelop one church at the expense of them for the sake of the bigger one. A strong merge, a real merge, takes the the good of both. And what we see is those are increased. I'll tell you 3 stories in our district that has happened. Well, one was in my district now, with redistricting that's changed. Orland Park. Orland Park Faith is one of our largest, most healthy churches. They have multi-clergy, they've got staff coming on their staff, they've got great budget. Everything's going great there. On Sunday mornings, they have to have people outside directing traffic in and out. They were 4 dying churches. And they merged together. And this is what they all gave up. They all gave up their building. They all gave up their name. They all gave up their pastors. And they all gave up some programming. And they came together and formed a new church called Faith. None of them have been called Faith. They gave up all that, built a brand new building. So 4 churches. Now imagine what kind of building you build. 4 churches to 1. Beautiful building. Layout's wonderful. And they've been strong ever since. Recent merges in the last, this was a number of years ago now, but it's still strong. It's one of our strongest churches. Those who are like, you can name a number of churches that have been, the big churches in the block, they're no longer as healthy. It's ones that are merged, they seem to get healthier. 2 recent, Hope and Joliet. We went from a full-time to a quarter-time DS supply. They couldn't even afford any kind of pastor other than me just sending in this retired guy who wasn't even credentialed yet. And he just went into love on them. And that happened within a year, went down very quickly. And down the road at Plainfield Sharon, our oldest church, they actually helped start North Central College. Plainfield. So if you look at North Central College, that was founded with the help of Plainfield Sharon Methodist Church. Well, Plainfield Sharon did not want to close their building. They were a block away from the large Plainfield Church that's growing and massive, staff and doing good work. And they were just a little tiny out of the way church that no one knew was there. The roof was all falling apart. They couldn't afford anything. They were, they're just going through the reserves, and they had no reserves. But they did not want to give up the building because a woman 40 years ago had made stained glass windows. And she was the mother of a couple members. And all of them were around when they were built and put in. And they refused to close the building because they wanted to keep the windows alive. Then they met the people of Joliet Hope. And Joliet Hope said, come on in, look what we could do together. And they started having a conversation. And pretty soon Sharon said, okay, they still want to keep the windows, but when we sell, we'll cut them out, and we'll each give money, and we'll take them home and do that kind of thing. They went over to Joliet Hope. Hope did the right thing. We helped them, teach them how to create that relationship. They started worshiping there, and within about 3 weeks, I got a call from the lead proponent of keeping the windows. Said, Jeffrey, we don't need the windows any longer. I said, why not? Because we found a family that's more important to be a part of ministry than it is to look at some windows. And so they took pictures of it, made a book, and said, okay, now it's just sitting and collecting dust on it. But do you get it? So they were welcomed in. So it was really, and they're strong. They've gone up to half-time, from the quarter time to half-time. They're about ready to go 3/4 and all, probably to full-time within a year. They've doubled their budget within a year. And the people from Sharon, there were 12 in worship at the end on a regular basis. They're now attracting 30-some from that church alone at Hope. And Hope increased as well because those people came over. And now they're all doing it together. And no one feels like I have to be the only one who always sweeps up. And now there's committees and there's ministry. And they're just so excited. Right? Then there's Journey of Hope, which is 2 congregations in Elgin, same thing. 2 churches about to die. They came together. They created a new name. Flourishing. I went there, and these were 2 dead churches. I mean, just dying if you went to their worship services before they joined. About a year into it, I went to the worship that they invited me to. It was packed. People couldn't find a seat. The choir had like 35 to 40 people in it, whereas before it was like 6. And there were 2 baptisms that day. And he said, yeah, we're going to have a couple more. And then and kids were crying and babies. And I said, I got up and they wanted me to say a few words. I did. And babies were kind of screaming and crying. I said, doesn't that sound good? Yeah. Okay, so that's my preaching answer. So there's really good opportunities for this type of thing. But it's got to be the way the churches feel called to be. There's no cookie cutter approach. I will not be called in and I'll give you cookie cutter and do this. There's a procedure and a process for some things. But there's autonomy in this for the churches that are involved because your DNA is different than any other church. Your gifts, your people, your programs, your ministries are all different. So, if what we've seen to be the most successful is you have people who come together who are open-minded and be on a team. Don't join a team if you're having an agenda against or for. Go in there with an open mind. Create a team and start to decide, what is it that we could be? Are we the church that sells all 3 buildings and builds one brand new one somewhere? That's open and fresh and clean and new and accessible and this, that, and that. Or do you see opportunities in your areas for your churches where we need to keep the buildings? Are you a church that adopts more and maybe keep one of the buildings and you all go join it, you have a new name, or you keep one of the names? What is it that you are? Elmhurst doesn't need, Elmhurst area and Villa Park is, you don't need necessarily 3 churches to serve this area. I mean, do you all have empty pews on Sunday morning? Right? And people drive 30 minutes. So, what is it that you want to do? And we can talk about more about this. I can answer questions. You can ask them questions. I'm really excited about mergers. I think they're really working. I think they've got a long-term impact. It's not just a short-term solution. I think it's good use of stewardship money. And I also have people from those churches who have committed to coming out and working with churches that want to merge because they're so committed to it now that they're willing to come out. We merged Winfield and West Chicago recently. This is really exciting. Again, Winfield didn't want to give up their building, finally had to do something and forced into it. Joined with West Chicago, they welcomed it so well. Almost everybody went over, and now the money's going to be used to build a sanctuary that West Chicago was going to build 35 years ago, but couldn't afford to then. And so now people are going to see as you go on this main street, something's happening at the United Methodist Church because they came together, and they both get to be a part of it. They rename themselves, and everyone's excited. Same thing with them. They had a pavilion they really wanted to bring over, and they finally said, forget it. We don't need that anymore. So that's interesting. All right. What questions do you have about potential mergers? I went pretty fast, I know. Okay.
Can I just ask you, is the sign-in sheet still going around if someone got it there? Let's make it quicker tonight. Continue that on. Has it been here yet? Thank you.
Let me tell you the general process. So just by process, if you all decide to have a committee that would research, explore, you come up with some ideas, you eventually want to come up with a proposal that all 3 churches or 2 churches, I don't know how many of you would want to come together if at all, but let's say at least 2 of you or 3 of you decide to come together. You would then do presentations to your congregations to say this is the idea of how we're going to be, this would be the name, this would be that. Then each congregation has to have a congregational vote. So I would go into each or assign another elder who knows what they're doing with merges to eventually come, and we have a charge conference where you would vote on that your church would like to do that. Then we have an all-church vote later with all the final details. So this first charge conference isn't all the details, because we don't want the church to go through a year of exploration for the church to say no. It's here's roughly what it would look like and what we're thinking, should we continue? You would say yes or no. If you said yes, those churches that said yes to continue will keep going until there's a full finalized plan. If at the church conference it's a yes, and we don't do a simple majority, we go 2/3, because if 51% of you say yes and 49% of you say no, you will not be a happy family. And so we go 2/3. Once 2/3 is done, I take it to cabinet if I'm still around as a yes, or the next yes. We will take it to cabinet. Cabinet needs to give it final approval. By doing a merge and not simply waiting for yourself to close, you do 2 things for your congregations and your community. One, you keep all the resources in the area. If, let's say, First closes, but the other 2 stay alive and well, all the assets from First will be shut down, sold, and all the resources will go to the conference. We then use them for health grants for churches to start new church starts. because all buildings, all property is under the trust of the commons. But when you merge, it stays there. Now, because we're doing so many merges, we're actually going to create a policy where a little bit of that is put into a fund to help other churches who need it. Otherwise, we'll have no way to help churches. I believe some of your churches have had health grants that we've given you from the fund. That came from closed churches. So all the funds stay in your area, all the resources you can use. If you decide to build a new building, you sell each one for $1.5 million, you now have $4.5 million to build a brand new thing, you can easily do that. Well, maybe not easily. Pricing. Okay, so it doesn't have to go to annual conference. It just, if you decide you want it, cabinet says yes, and cabinet is not saying no to a merge. So if you want it, you can get it. If you don't want it, keep going the way you are. Yes?
There's another United Methodist Church in Elmhurst. What's happening with Faith Evangelical?
They went through the disaffiliation process, so if they finalize disaffiliation, they will no longer be United Methodist.
Jim, would you mind standing up on the stage with that board?
They do it
It'd be
next.
so much easier to see you. Thank you.
And they are not probably a church to be a part of this process.
Okay, thank you.
Yes?
I'm not trying to be divisive here, but I think demographics of 60181 are not the same as 60126. So, I have a question there. The fit, right?
So, absolutely. So, for those of you who don't know, I've been appointed to Calvary Little Park since 2020, so I've been there almost 3 years now, right? And until I was appointed there, I did not realize what a social economic moat 83 is. To me, it's fascinating, right? So, so Nancy's point is correct for the Villa Park people. The demographic between Elmhurst on the east side of 83 and Villa Park on the west side is very different, and it does raise a question about participating in this process in Elmhurst. So, at the same time, I started a conversation that's not part of this, but I also started a conversation with Reverend Mann at Lombard First. Okay? So, some of these things that we're talking about are general parameter type discussions about how a merger works, why we would do it, right? Villa Park can also have the question in front of them of, do you want to go east or do you want to go west? Okay, but it's just more work for him.
Jim, who else did you say you started a conversation with?
I did. I started a conversation with Reverend Michael Mann, who is the senior pastor at Lombard First. Lombard, okay.
And I have another question.
Yeah.
It seems like Calvary started this process of discernment before Pastor Jim came. And at the time, we were told, oh, mergers don't work. Mergers don't work, people don't want to. So what's changed in like 5 years?
Desperation.
Okay.
Back in the day, 5 years ago even, you could still afford to keep things going on with very few people there.
So COVID and...
COVID cost everything. People not coming back from COVID. Watching non-denominationals move into the area, build giant churches and have filled parking lots while we remain the same and shrink. Kids moving away, not coming back. Sunday schools shutting down, all that stuff. So it's a desperation. So what happens in that is people then say it's okay to change. And I think COVID taught us how to adapt. And then there's a whole thing about that, the adaptive everything. If you go into business, those in business, you've seen that adaptive work. There's Alvin Toffler wrote a book called Future Shock years ago, and what it was is about how back when I was studying it 20 years ago, there was a 10-year outlier where futurists could come in and help the company see the trends that would lead up to about 10 years. And then it slowly kept going down, now it's 6 months. So companies actually hire these futurists in-house to adapt them so quickly, and those who can adapt, Kodak, you know that, right? You know that story? They had the first digital camera. They didn't want to adapt. They put it in their safe, and Kodak's now defunct. And you can talk about it a whole bunch of things. So, does that make sense?
Yes.
And we're seeing we're seeing actually that they are working. That was also fear of bringing people together, I think, too. But yeah.
What's your, when you're talking demographics, what's your definition of demographics for Firefly?
Well, you guys would have to do a lot more study. We have a resource I saw you listed, Mission Insight. We pay a pretty exorbitant fee at the conference to get into Mission Insight. That's used by people like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, businesses use this. We also use it as a church. They do studies, surveys, trends, all the stuff in the area. So you can go in and pick, you can actually draw your area of all the communities you want within your realm. And it'll tell you what kind of sermon they like, what traditional was what you got from yours, and I don't know what the radius was, but it'll tell you everything you want to know about church. So that, those types of things, age, race, is all part of that too. But it talks about religion, faith, what people are asking, questions at the top. Sermons was up in this area, obviously, second.
So,
Is that
is the inspiration of the demographics of Elmhurst is that much different than Illinois?
That was for 60126 only, and that was for an example.
Okay, so, so for me, like, I've played around with Mission Insight, looking at the Villa Park area. So the example that I would use, if you look at Mission Insight and look at Villa Park, there's a projection there of the average age. So this is probably coming as no surprise to people in Villa Park, but the average age in Villa Park is forecast to go up steeply over the next 10 years, right? So then the question is, how do you take that data and come into a church setting and discern what God is calling us to do, knowing that we've got, a population that's getting older, right? Loneliness, loneliness is a huge trend now in this country, right? And I know that you know from our experience in Villa Park that there are people that get left behind as they get older. Their kids move, blah, 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 right? And we have, there are people in Villa Park that we are their only social connection, right? Seems like a good place for the church to step into, right? So that data is, I think that our subscription to the Northern Illinois Conference covers the entire conference, right? So we can look at data, we can look at data anywhere you want, but it's just a question of picking a point and drawing a circle around it and saying, what does it look like? What are the people who live in this circle look like? Okay, so we can do that.
And I would say something to that too, if I could. What you offer is becoming less and less important to some degree. Because you talked about relational connection stuff, right? What's the last two that just merged within the last year and a half to 2 years in this district, they're successful because they have a connection to one another that people feel like they're part of a team. They don't even care what they're doing. They give up the programs. They don't care as much if I'm doing this program, this mission, or this. I just want to be a part of people who want to do it with me. And so that's such a huge thing for people because people are desperately lonely.
I think there's some illustrations that might demonstrate to that more, let's say, the Catholic schools in Elmhurst, I think, are still up and running. Villa Park closed down, 2 years ago, the Catholic grade school, and Sacred Heart in Lombard just closed down this year. So there is not that drive to educate the youth in a Christian environment any longer. So you can see that's a great example of where we're trending right now.
And you'll have to get serious if you do this. If you do this or if you don't do this, all this will help each church. Because you'll know more, and you're going to have to be ready that you won't be able to do everything for all people. What can you do? What can you do well? And how can you love on people and provide for them? So, other questions? Yeah. Yes.
Are we talking like a 2-church or 3-church merge or more than 3-church merge?
If you want to move 20 churches together and it fits strategically.
How do we even know?
Okay, so I would say this. So from a district standpoint, my job as district superintendent, they also call it district strategist. So we work with a team, a district strategy team, that will look at the area. If you decide to merge, I would talk to them and say, are we going to miss an opportunity to serve the community by doing this? right? So there'll be some strategy from the conference to say, have you thought about this? If you decide to do all three, is that, say all three of you come together, could you serve a 30-mile radius with where you might find a place, or could you not? So it's really kind of up to what your church has decided to do. It could be 2, it could be 3. It could be, maybe another one joins on board. Who knows? Maybe Lombard will say, let's do it. I mean, there are churches, I'm from Aurora, there are churches where people come from the city to the suburbs for church. There are people who are driving from up near the border to church. People come if they find a church that really make a difference and matter. So there's no, conference will not, and I promise you this, as long as I'm district superintendent, I'm not going to come in and force you to do something unless you're at the point where you have to close because, you just can't afford it. If there's something like that, I'll have to come in and work with you. But I'm not here to force this on you. This is your call. You could ask me, and this is up to you. I'm here to resource. And you won't be alone. We'll resource you through it. Even some grants, like we have some news. We're going to be using some of our disaffiliation money where, like, say you merge and you want to build a building, we need a little upfront money. We might be able to offer some to start a building project with the fact that you pay it back. We have what's called Red Doors, a loan to the United Methodist Church, other things like that. So there's some resources that we have. We'll bring in other merged churches to talk to you before you make a decision, so you know the realities. So you're not hearing 3 reverends babble at you and preach at you, but you hear actual lay people coming in and saying this is the way it really is. Well, we'll resource that heck out of you so you get whatever you can. Yes, sir.
Have we looked at the rising popularity of some of these unaffiliated churches and tried to figure out what is there that we could do that would turn our membership around?
I have 3 kind of sort of answers. I don't know if you guys want to jump in on that too. But, one, we can't compare apples to oranges. You can't take a merged congregation and turn it into a non-denomination because they start from scratch and they're just, they have a different DNA from the beginning. When we start new church starts, we can do that, but merges can't quite do that. 2 is it. And I don't have all the data on this, but I did a little bit of looking around and researching and put some numbers together just for fun. If you look at some of these non-denominational churches, the reason they're so big and look so impressive is because they come from far distances to go there. Because they're the only one. If we just took one United Methodist Church in Elmhurst, imagine what your parking lot might look like. It would look a lot different. It might be a lot bigger. See, so we were a church in every county in the United States, I think, as United Methodist.
One time we had more churches than post offices.
Think about that. That was a multiplication of the United Methodist Church. And now, that's no longer needed. Because people don't say, oh, that's United Methodist Church, it's on my block, I'll go there. Right? So, so I think you can learn from them, yes. But I think better for our DNA is you learn from the churches that are United Methodists that are growing fast. Because that's going to be more like who we are. And you can get that. Yeah, we can get you in touch with those people.
And I'm going to jump on since Reverend Bross invited me to jump in. So Willow Park, we space share with a non-denominational church. They worship at 9:30 on Sunday. And they're a wonderful church. They've been great space shares for us. And so I'm Facebook friends with them. I see what they post and stuff, right? And I don't know, but I would probably say every month they probably have 2 or 3 baptisms. They've been growing. So they've been there 2 or 3 years, and they've probably grown from 10 people to probably 50. And what I think. So this is a puzzle to me too. I'm always like, well, right? And so this is just my answer. Just colors it, but they have an unrelenting drive to bring people to God, to love them, and to incorporate them in their community. And present company accepted. I love all of you, okay? But we've been more inwardly focused. We take care of our members, and we're not quite about we need to bring other people to this because we have good news, and we want them to be part of it. That's what motivates a non-denominational. That's their mission. right? And I think that over the course of 20, 30 years, and then a couple bouts of survival, we sort of closed ranks. We take care of our own. We take great care of our own. But how do we reimagine this to be the church to the community? How do we be the church in that 30-mile radius, right? That's some of the exploration I think we did. And that's been my answer on why these non-denominational seem to be, is that they stress to every one of their members, your goal, our goal, everybody's goal is to multiply. We want to bring people here. We want to love them. We want them to be part of our community. My experience has been that's a different focus than we have sometimes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to attest to what both of you have been saying about the I guess, the shot of adrenaline you get with the merge, because I was fortunate enough to attend the late training back in the winter. I couldn't make it in the spring. But I had a chance to meet some of these lay people that were from these merged churches, and it was like night and day. These people were fired up. They're talking about things in the future, wanting to planning and stuff like that. I mean, you could tell the difference between those of us that have been, got into the defensiveness of trying to survive versus those that are looking outward and how freely they share the information about giving things up.
Yeah. Here's the church. Here's the steeple. Open doors for what? Yes, here's the church. Here's the steeple. Open doors. I got to go out and get people. That's the new mantra. There's a church, and that's when I say this too. There's a church, actually, we're about to celebrate them. They're in rural Podunk, Illinois. I don't know. I say Podunk. I don't know what town it is. But the church is actually, people have to drive through the cornfields to get to it. So it's that kind of setting, right? There's no town. Their pastor is going to take in 30 new members. 30. When's the last time your church saw 30 new members in a year? And prior to Easter, it took in more, because they have that unrelenting drive to say, we're going to be important here. Yes?
What, if any, experience is there with, in this process, as if we go forward, those of us who live outside 60126? And what is the role of those who are members of the churches here, but we live in other places? How does that work? Do we have, do people that live outside the target area
Yeah,
get to serve on the committee teams?
Anyone outside that area has to pay all the bills. The rest.
Let me get the red pen for that.
I think if I'm correct about this, Joe, and Joe bringing that up as an example of a demographic here.
I just brought that up as an example of what are the opportunities that we could have, and that was one example. And I hate to give an example because then we get fixated on that. But I wanted to raise that up to us to say, what are some things that we could be doing that we haven't thought about? And the other thing that I would say about those examples is that they're all spiritual. This is our business.
And that's probably across the board.
And that's going to be across the board, so especially the loneliness. I mean, loneliness is at 61% across the country. I mean, it doesn't matter your demographic, everybody's lonely. Everybody's lonely. So, I mean, thanks for asking questions, but I just brought that up as a data point.
So just
Well,
when you come up with
maybe I didn't express my question. What is the role of those who live outside where the new building, whatever?
there is no outside the new building. There is no outside.
Member of the church.
You decide, if you're a member of the church, you're a member of the church, like anything. And you decide what area you want to explore as a part of who you think might be people attract to your church. Each church would need to send representatives to a group that you would form that would begin to discover this stuff. There's no cookie cutter. I'm not saying this is the way it is. You have to learn your area. Elmhurst is different than that church I was talking about in rural America.
Podunk was the name.
That's what the DF from their colleague, you can remember the name either. But I don't even know if it's incorporated. But your church is different than Aurora. Your church is different. Each of your church from one another.
Yeah.
So you just gotta work together and figure it out. I mean, that's gonna be work you have to do. Yes.
The question was raised at our table, whether United Methodism's schism may be keeping people away from us. People don't know who we are. They don't know which side we're on. Do you think, is that something that's happening, or is it just all churches?
You know who's staying away from United Methodist churches because of that? United Methodists. People don't know.
Other people don't know.
A few. If there's somebody who's really strongly on one side or the other, and if you're not inclusive enough, or if you're not dogmatic enough, either side, they might listen to that. You've got, out of 1,000 people in the area, you have 998 people who aren't thinking that stuff. Yeah, that's been born to be not the case. If they're not coming to our church because we're not welcoming, we call ourselves family. I really get bothered by that when I go and say, what's the best thing about your church? We're a family! Great, that means I'm an in-law, which means I'm an outlaw. And when we start acting like a family, families are our most dysfunctional systems in our country. True. And we say, because we love each other, I was in church, in Northfield, and we had a joint Thanksgiving celebration with 3 other churches. And so we had ushers, and in the church that I was serving, the ushers would take everyone to their seats and then give them the bulletin. It was like the tradition. Well, we had 2 other churches, and so a woman came in, very knowledgeable, and she came in, she saw the bulletin sitting there, the ushers were sitting, so she just took one and sat down. One of our ushers ran over and said, "You don't take a bulletin here, we give it to you, and we sit you." That's our family system. She ran in the bulletin and said, "I'm really sorry." She actually, in fact, they didn't come back to Thanksgiving service next week. But we do that same kind of thing, even subtly. So it's a whole, and when you merge, something happens where almost, if you do it right, automatically it gets rid of some of that edge, or some of that stuff that is mine. Actually makes you sit in different seats than you used to. Yes?
My question is, what happens to your pastors then in your merging?
We don't move them for a while because they're going to be key. We intentionally do not move a pastor unless it needs to be. Like if you're merging because you can only afford one, we have to talk about that. But the hope is, you guys got to be on board. The hope is that they'd stay for a couple of years anyway, just because that would just be hard. If they're going to lead through that process and somebody new. And that happened where I was. I was in a new church. We were growing rapidly. We were merging with another. We had a whole DNA ready, and the new pastor came with a whole different idea of what that was, and led them differently, and it really hurt that merge. So it would be that they hopefully stay. The other reality is you probably could, and I would really push hard if, say you brought 3 churches together, I'd push hard for 2 full-time clergy to remain. Because you would have the resources to do that. Like if you sold buildings and didn't spend it all, you could put some of that in a trust fund that would pay for your expenses of your building. Something like that, so you don't have to come up with operating funds to pay for the electricity. It comes out of the funds from a church that you're getting interest from. And so now you can put the program, you can keep 2 highly trained full-time clergy for a while, maybe even add additional staff. That's some of the benefits of merge too.
Yeah, it kills me when you see, we have services Saturday night, Sunday morning, Sunday late morning, Sunday afternoon. I mean, it's like, what?
Now imagine you come in, it's hard to find a seat for some
Yeah.
people. It'd be a nice time. Yes.
I think that, to the question you brought up and to what you said in your opening remarks, let's face it, Methodist churches got the publicity recently of being non-inclusive. And now we need to show people that the people that are United Methodist, that didn't disaffiliate, are inclusive people. And that's, I almost decided to leave when certain decisions were made. And now that those that are non-inclusive have to leave the United Methodist Church, us United Methodists need to focus on being loving and inclusive. Because now we're not infighting, we're, like you said, we're free to move on.
Research has shown there's two types of things happening out there. People who really want to be told what to think, which is a more fundamentalist theology, like this is it, right or wrong, period. Some people want that, some younger people are attracted to that. The vast majority, 68% of people under the age of 25, are looking for diversity and inclusivity. Doesn't mean necessarily that they're even on a certain page of politics, but they at least want to be in a church where everybody's welcome because they don't feel welcome. And so you become a church like that, you're going to have young people coming to you. Or if you tell them what to think, then that also brings in some folks. So either or, but yeah, I think you'd find a lot.
I think the concept of, like you said, inclusive, and again, bridging the age group, because I think one of the things we haven't talked about is the age gap. We've been avoiding that, it's in, if you've just recently been retired, you know it exists. It's, that even your own kids don't relate to you, especially the younger ones. So we have to develop skills to bridge and tell them our story. But to go on to something else about being, like you said, inclusive, we've attended services and talked to clergy in, I can't tell you how many states, California, Colorado, New Jersey, Florida, and Wisconsin, whatever. And, of all those places we've attended, we never, this type of stuff never even comes up in conversation. I've always been welcome there. But the thing, so we got to be careful if we're not just manifesting something that might be just in our area, that we might be overly sensitive to, because we don't see it everywhere.
Yeah. Inclusivity is much more than the LGBTQI debate. It's just about being the kind of church where everyone's welcome and people feel it, young people feel it. But also, it means you do things that are welcoming to them, meaning they're going to want to be online more than they're going to want to be in your pews. Right? And so you can't say membership means you sit in a pew necessarily. And there's a whole lot of things we can go into, but that's the kind of inclusivity they want, and they're looking for, and they're desperate for. And they want diversity. They want diverse thoughts. They want to be able to have good discussions. But they're also looking for mentoring. So if you're a church that welcomes them, talks to them, listens to them. My daughter is 22, just became a math teacher. She is on the vision team of her church, and the next, her next youngest person is like 68. She was asked really hard. I said, yeah, but they listen. She got invited in, and they take her seriously. And that means if you've served the trustee chair for 15 years, step down. Let somebody else jump in. And if no one else steps up to do it, trustees doesn't happen. Don't be the savior for your church. Open the space for others. It may take a while. That's hurting our churches. Same old people doing everything.
But what if there's not people to step in?
Well, we have to go through each specific case, but usually what happens is people eventually come forward. And you change your expectations of what needs to be done. I mean, you can't have this, you can't have a limited, there's an abundance with God. There's an abundance. And you can either be a naysayer to that abundance, or you can be a part of God's abundance. That's what I think. That's what I've seen. I mean, those two churches I talked about, Joliet and Plainfield, neither of them had enough people. Now all of a sudden they have too many people. What else? Yes?
I'm curious about, I don't want to be negative, but the other side of the coin, what percentage of mergers didn't work out so hot? And if so, what were the factors that made them work?
Merged too quickly. They just jumped in because they kind of needed to or felt like they needed to. People weren't willing to give up their stuff. People weren't willing to have a new, fresh idea and accept it. The whole family mentality kind of deal shut them down. Also, very divergent theologies have done that. I haven't witnessed that in this district or this conference, but I've heard about that with others. Whereas one church has this theology, this church doesn't, and there's no room left open up for everyone, or a dominant culture. Like there's what's called adoption merges, and those are merges where you don't come together and equally form. It's a big church adopts, so the DNA of the big one that's working has to kind of take over. So the smaller church has to accept it. And more like this, it'd be a little bit more equal quality, I think. So those are some.
Get back into the corner, it could be a little bit more dangerous, a little more wiggle room.
You want to go into it willingly because it's exciting and it's a great potential. Then we have to. I think when you get to we have to, then you're kind of on that last legs anyway. And so are you healthy enough to engage in that kind of conversation? And it also means that your major leaders have to let other people lead too sometimes, because the people who kept the church together aren't necessarily the people to lead into the new. Moses, you know that story, right? what happened to him?
He died and forgot the promise.
Who let him in?
Joshua.
Moses didn't even get to where he was promised to go.
I mean, also, like, I'm thinking what he's thinking too is like percentage, we talk about, positive Joliet this year. So in the last 5 years, I don't know what the number is, you've tried to merge 100 churches, but only 5% made it through?
No. We haven't done 100, but.
But yeah, is it 50%?
I don't have numbers exactly, but I would say of the ones that merged, I can only think of one closure.
Okay.
So maybe aren't as flourishing.
It's
but
beneficial, regardless.
I think,
Data has shown that it's beneficial than.
That'd be interesting. That'd be interesting to do, because more of these congregations are going to have these conversations. So that'd be interesting to know how many, because we merge differently. And this is a new phenomenon. Vital merger is really new, or we were merging just out of necessity. And now we're merging out of possibility. You hear the difference?
Yes.
So, I'd have to see. But I think most find it, well, and whether they're long-term down the road, I don't know. Because part of it is, if you have 2 buildings down to 1 and you're only paying for half what you used to, it's easy to survive for a while. So it could be some of that too. Yeah. But I think more than not, I'm excited about it because they're successful. A closed church doesn't come back to life.
Right.
But a merged church potentially has it. If they don't, we're just back to where we're going to be anyway. To me, it's worth a shot. Sweet. What else? Anything? Well, if you need me for anything, let me know.
Again, thank you all for coming. I think our next steps is at our next planned church council meetings, we'll just have some more conversation from what we've learned today. And I hope this was helpful and help you think a little bit about this and what the possibilities are as we move forward. And Jim and I are both hoping we'll all say yes to this, but that's not for us to decide. This is really for the congregation to decide and figure out how God is calling us to be Methodist in this time and in this place. So we look forward to the conversations that will be birthed out of this time we've had together. Can we pray? Let us pray. God, we give you thanks for Jesus, who entered into this world and into our human condition. He loved us. He led us into new ways of community and new ways of holiness and into new ways of righteousness. I ask your blessing upon every person who has been here today, and be with them as they go to live their lives and to hear your call upon them. As we continue this process, be with us, open our eyes, open our hearts, and open our ears to what you are calling us to in the present moment. All this we pray in your holy name. Amen.